Welcome to the Comic Blast Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Comic Blast Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Grayson, and I am sick. But along with me is a man who is not sick, and his name is Keenan. Hello, my friend.
What's up? Happy to be doing this again. This is probably the best thing that we've done as a podcast. Right?
I have to say, I agree.
It's right up there.
Yeah. Listen, I want to shout out everybody who's been letting us know that this has been something you guys have been enjoying, even though we've only done one episode and meant this to just be kind of a smaller scale series. But thank you guys for the appreciation and support and the demand for the second episode. We probably put this out a little bit sooner than we actually originally planned.
Yeah.
But figuring, let's not stop the momentum. So,
It's
this is our Spider-Man series and review, just Spider-Man content in general. We've already reviewed the first Spider-Man Sam Raimi movie, and now today we're reviewing the second. But sorry, you were about to say something, and I cut you off.
No, I was just gonna say it's crazy because I think we were planning to do this like one movie every 2 to 3 weeks or so. Because
right.
we have a few months until Spider-Man Far From Home comes out. So Ideally we would like to space it out. But to be honest, we could continue to talk about Spider-Man every single day, Grayson and I. So like we'll never run out of things to talk about when it comes to Spider-Man. Like we're going to be good. We're going to have content for Spider-Man leading up to No Way Home. So the fact that you guys were asking for it was really awesome. And that's essentially why we're pumping the second episode out a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and it's also given me like a lot of incentive to just seek out more Spider-Man content in general, and why I will definitely be replaying both PS4 and Miles Morales before No Way Home. What did I just say? No Way Home. Keenan's over here crying because if you follow him, you'll know that his PlayStation 4 no longer works, and he cannot access these wonderful installments into both the video game realm and the Marvel realm, and we cry for him.
Yeah, it's been painful. Leading up to that review, I'll probably be watching cinematics on YouTube just to prepare myself because I can't play.
He's gonna be watching the gameplay, a walkthrough, but he's gonna have the controller in his hand and pretending like he's playing.
You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna find. I'm sure Caboose probably has like some playthroughs on his YouTube channel. I'll just pretend I'm playing along. So shout out to Caboose, and I'll probably look that up at some point in time.
Yeah. But yeah,
Spider-Man
without
2.
any further ado, Spider-Man 2, released in 2004. I believe it was like June 28th is the release date of when it came out. Somewhere in there, late June. Sponsored by Dr. Pepper. Directed by Sam Raimi, starring, the usual Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, James Franco. But the GOAT of this movie, Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, who is supposed to be coming back in Spider-Man No Way Home as the same villain. Whether it's the same universe or a different universe, it's hard to say. Alfred Molina has said things like it will be the same universe portrayal and that he actually didn't die. Which I find strange because the way the ending. Listen, again with these things, we're probably just gonna go full blown spoilers. It's been 17 years since this movie came out.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen Spider-Man 2, just right now, stop. Go watch Spider-Man 2. And if you haven't seen Spider-Man 1, go watch that. Go listen to our previous episode. Then watch Spider-Man 2 and come listen to this episode. Follow along with us. Enjoy the ride if you haven't seen him. And if you already have, watch them again because they're that great. Because both you and I did. The last episode we did, I did not watch Spider-Man 1. But within the past 2 days, because I've been a little sniffly, I decided to watch both Spider-Man 1 and I watched Spider-Man 2 today with my girlfriend. And speaking of which, here is a quote And this is what I wanted to share with Keenan. He does not know I was gonna, or he does not know what I'm about to say.
Very nervous.
As we're watching this, we're about an hour in. Actually, I think we're at like about to be at the train sequence. So about an hour and a half in. There's about 30 minutes left in the movie.
Yeah.
She was doing some work on her computer and whatnot. Anyway, she finally like puts it down and she says, "Is Tony Stark in this universe at all?" And I went, "Nope." And she then asked, she was like, "Okay, so which one is more accurate to the comics?" And I said, "This." I said, the original, like, Spider-Man's origin has nothing to do with Tony Stark whatsoever. And she went, "Oh, okay." And I'm not saying that to knock my girlfriend, because she is not a diehard comic book fan or anything like that.
That's a knock on the MCU.
Yes, and so, Keenan and I have made our what is the word? Our disgruntles, or whatever you want to call it, we
have voiced our displeasure.
Yes, that's the best way to say it. Displeasure with the MCU version, specifically with the character arcs, not necessarily the portrayals or
acting,
the character design or anything like that. Or the acting, like Tom Holland is great and all that. But yeah, it's been what Spider-Man, like, who he is as a character, who Peter Parker is as a character, his relationships around him, and his overall origin. The MCU has taken in a direction that is very unlike Spider-Man. So that quote right there, it made me a little sad. I didn't like say anything to her. I'll probably tell her after they recorded this episode that, like, I mentioned her, and why she said that, because I was like, man, that sucks. I was like, there's people out here that think Tony Stark is the reason Spider-Man got his suit and everything.
Like how his origin is through Tony Stark. That's scary. Right. There's you know how, like, I've been, I've said multiple times that, like, let this generation have their version of Spider-Man, but if this generation, like, coming up, the younger kids, only know this version of Spider-Man and not seeing the impact of the lessons that Uncle Ben taught, and he really is responsible for the origin of Spider-Man. That's pretty disappointing, because I don't feel like there's been much value in the lessons that Tony has taught him. A few things, but nothing on the level of, throughout this trilogy, Uncle Ben always comes back into play. From the first one, the second one, the third one. His identity crisis, exactly, the identity crisis that he suffers in this second film has a lot to do with him understanding, who he is and what Uncle Ben has taught him, and how to, I don't know, we'll get into, like, the actual story or whatever, but there's a flashback of Uncle Ben. I think it's very impactful. It's not really a flashback. It's more like sort of like a dream sequence or something along those lines.
It's like basically him imagining the continuation of the conversation he had in the car before the wrestling match in the first movie.
Yep.
Or basically just like this idealistic version of Uncle Ben, and basically being like, like basically telling, it's like, I don't want to do this anymore, Uncle Ben. Like, it's getting in the way of everything. Like, I'm extremely paraphrasing. Yeah. He's like, I'm a Spider-Man no more. Yeah. And which is one of the best scenes in not just the movie, but in the entire trilogy. Yeah. And in all of, like, Spider-Man movies in general. It is so well done. Yeah. The emotion on both of them is, like, for both of those actors, Cliff Robertson and Tobey Maguire, is just so good.
They set up that internal conflict within Peter so well throughout the beginning of the movie, first half of the movie, because he's getting beaten up so bad. And he even has this thing where Peter has this part where he talks to himself, and he's like, am I not supposed to have what I want? It's a really big thing, and that's, I got frustrated with the MCU Spider-Man when he didn't want to be Spider-Man when he's on his trip, and it was all because he just wants to have fun and hang out with MJ. Whereas this version is like, I can kind of understand why he doesn't want to be Spider-Man. at this
He
point in
is
time.
late to all of his classes. He's about to be failed. He's failing everybody around him in his close circle. Like
the love of his
MJ,
life is about to get married to somebody else. He lost
Yeah.
his job. He can't afford anything. And on top of that, because of that, he's losing his powers. Like he can't even safely be Spider-Man if he wanted to, because it's affecting his head so much. So, going back to this second movie, they did such a good job portraying Peter Parker as this kid who's just trying to make it, and he is not, he isn't given the best hand in life, and you see that, and you can kind of empathize with him in this film. So it's the main reason why I find this to be one of the greatest superhero movies, if not the greatest superhero movie of all time.
Speaking of which, I was going to say this is one of the rare instances where I think there is 3 or 4 comic book movies that are sequels that are better than the originals.
Yes.
And I would say the other ones would be Captain America: The Winter Soldier, The Dark Knight, Logan, and Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Those are 4 sequels that are so transcendent. Like
They're monumental.
They like not even like elevate and like expound upon the original. They just like blow it out of the water. Like it's just so well done in terms of a superhero movie, because it feels what feels like to me with all those movies is that they feel more than just a comic book movie. They feel like a real it's a
human
movie,
story.
A human story about a superhero.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about my superheroes, and that's what I love about Spider-Man in particular. Is he feels at his core, it's not a story about a guy with spider powers. It's a story about it's a story about a regular guy with regular issues who has to be he has the responsibility to be a superhero, and he has to deal with that every single day because of a choice a wrong choice that he made, and he has to be responsible and correct that wrong choice because he knows what's right to do. But man, it is beating the ever-living crap out of him.
Yeah.
I mean, like, he cannot pay his bills on time. Like, he's already got advances and stuff. Like, and he can't even support his Aunt May, who is like
losing
crippling in debt. Yeah, I mean, and by the way, I really want to talk about some particular things, specifically with Aunt May.
Yeah, me too.
Rosemary Harris, I have determined, is the best Aunt May. She is fantastic. I love Sally Fields as well. And I'll get to those when we get to the Taza movies. I think she is great as well. I feel like Sally Fields is the best modern day Aunt May.
Yeah, like
she feels like more realistic, I guess.
Yep.
In the sense of an aunt. But Aunt May feels realistic to those original 60s and 70s comics of like that really elderly Aunt May.
She is like a motherly aunt, and Sally Field feels more like an aunt. Like your aunt that you would see nowadays, if that makes sense.
Right.
But Aunt May is she's literally like Peter's mom.
Yeah, and we feel, and you definitely feel that because within the Taza movies, you see in the very beginning his parents.
Yep.
In this, these are the only parents he's ever known. And so, granted, I also just watched the first one, and so kind of going back, I'm not trying to go into retrospect of the first one, but when he says like I had a father, his name was Ben Parker, like that's such a powerful moment. It's the same thing with Aunt May, that like that's his mom, and so one of my favorite scenes. 2 of my favorite scenes, actually. One is very early in the movie when it's for Peter's birthday. It's like in the first 20 minutes of the movie.
Yep.
He comes back and she tries to, he sees the bills on her counter and she still gives him $20 and he's like, I can't take this. And she's like, you take this money, you take it. It's not much, just take it.
Yep.
It's like, for God's sake. And she's just weeping and it's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Like, Rosemary Harris does such a great job. And then one more scene later, which is a scene that I had to make sure I didn't make up in my head as I was watching the first movie.
Yeah.
And it's the scene in the second one where he reveals the truth about what happened that night.
Yep.
That it was his fault that Uncle Ben died. And
she didn't say a word.
she doesn't say a word. She just looks at him, and he like puts his hand like over hers, and she just pulls away.
Yeah.
Just goes upstairs and just closes the door. I was like, that hurts.
Yeah.
And it's like, and like you can tell, like I'm imagining myself in Peter's situation, like telling someone like if that had happened to me, like telling that, and I'm like, man, like props to Peter for doing that. Like that was totally the right thing to do, because you know his Aunt May is going to forgive him, and she does, obviously. But and you just get these really great scenes throughout the whole movie with him and Aunt May, and that like
there's a
I've
follow
come to,
up
like,
though with when she's actually like moving out of the house, and he comes back, and that's when she like says, you know, it's water under the bridge or over it, you know. And
right.
Even that scene is really cool. But I love when she brings up I can't remember the kid's name that's helping her move.
Henry.
Yeah. So she brings up how he wants to be Spider-Man when he's older, and you know, Peter's kind of confused as to why. You know, he's just like, you know, really. And you know what she says to him, I think, is kind of the thing that kind of gets him kick-started and realizing
that little
he's
monologue, it's so good.
Exactly. Just how she feels like everyone needs a hero. But yeah, back to Aunt May and the whole revealing that to her, super impactful. And it's like a constant theme of this film is that Peter's trying to do all of this stuff on his own, but he also has so many secrets that he wants to tell that's eating him alive, whether it be the thing with Uncle Ben or revealing his identity to Mary Jane, and then the whole thing with Harry's father. There's a lot of internal conflict going on, and he feels very alone, and you kind of in a way feel alone with him because you know his secrets and how much that's weighing on him. So that whole thing is just a constant theme. It's just about, like, you know, he's trying to let people in and get this weight off of his shoulders.
Yeah. Speaking of what you're talking about with Harry and his father, that's also in my notes, that I love the Osborn legacy throughout the Raimi movies.
Yeah.
I am actually a big James Franco Harry Osborn fan.
Yeah.
I think he does a great job. Some people are not a big fan of him. I like him personally. At least I like him with Tobey Maguire's Peter. Like, I think they just have good chemistry. Like, I feel that when I watch the first one and going into the second one and everything. And just kind of like that underlying grudge he has. And then it finally comes to fruition with, you know, the reveal to Harry that, oh, Peter is actually Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But that scene with Willem Dafoe's reprisal of the mirror, when he's like, avenge me, like he's that whole thing. Like, first of all, I just love seeing Willem Dafoe come back as Green Goblin. Like, he just does, again, such a great job with that role. But I love the kind of arc that we get for Harry throughout all three movies, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we watch Spider-Man 3 in the coming weeks.
For sure.
But yeah, like, another part of Peter's hardship is that he doesn't really have a best friend anymore. Like, he loses his best friend, and that's rough. Because of a choice that he didn't make, but because of Spider-Man, like, it's like, oh, well, he thought, like, you know, Harry thinks that he killed his dad. So that's just one little tidbit that I really like to mention.
Grayson's got a whole list of stuff.
I do. I have a list of things that I drew up before this episode.
Okay, so we've kind of like covered the whole, you know, Peter being beaten up, challenging his, you know, identity, who he wants to be, his place in the world, and, you know, does he want to, you know, just be a normal dude or not? But I'd like to get into like the turning point where he decides to just be, you know, Peter, and he has things start to pick up for him, you know. He's doing better in school, he looks well rested, and he's actually makes it on time for MJ's play, and you start to feel good for him, but at the same time, you know, like, how long can this go on? And one of the heartbreaking things about this movie is there's a scene in particular where somebody's getting mugged in the alley, and he makes that decision not to do anything, and you're just like, wow, this seems very out of character for him, but he kind of just
like he wants to do something, and he knows he's like, you know what, no, I'm done with this. Like he kind of has to force himself not to.
Yeah. But it leads us to the fire, and when he goes into that building without any superpowers or anything and rescues the little girl and brings her out, but then you find out that there was actually another person in the building, and I think it kind of hits him like, freak, I should have been able to sense that. I should have been able to do something about that, because
if I was still Spider-Man, I could have saved them.
Exactly, and he wasn't able to. Goes back to the whole thing with this inner conflict and him trying to figure out like who he wants to be. And I remember as a kid, I don't know if it was this way for you, but I was fairly young when I saw it. I'm sure you were pretty young when you saw the second one too.
Yeah.
I particularly wasn't super interested in the back and forth with the MJ thing. I kind of like, I would get annoyed with the romance. That's just me as a kid, but
right.
I'd get, annoyed with the whole thing, because it is like a central theme of this movie. Like our plot point is that whole back and forth with MJ. But now, obviously, it's amazing to me as an adult, because I can relate now.
I'll say this one point, okay? This is one point, and it is 2 words, 3 syllables. MJ sucks. Listen, in the comics, I love MJ, and I actually think Kirsten Dunst does a great job in this role. But God, I do not like MJ, all right? Because she walks all over Peter, all right? Like, she does not give him a break. And granted, like, I know, like, she doesn't know he's Spider-Man and all that, allegedly. Yeah. Because in the first one, okay, she totally figures out that he's Spider-Man by the end. She, like, puts her hands on her lips. She's like, oh, my God. And they do play off of that into this movie, like, oh, I think I always knew or whatever. And you're like, what?
No.
But the one thing is, like, going back to the first one and now lead into the second one. So, in the first one, she's dating Flash or whatever. She breaks up with Flash.
Yeah.
Well, then she starts dating Harry, okay?
Yeah.
And there's like clearly like this little like tease between Peter and MJ of like, oh, there's a little bit of romantic thing there. Well, as she's dating Harry, she kisses Spider-Man in the alleyway, all right? Not like obviously not knowing it's Peter, but she still cheated on Harry, okay? And then her and Harry break up, all right? But still, it was cheating. Yeah. And then eventually, like, okay, there's we get the third act, the final, like, the climax and everything, and then we get to the end of the movie, and they kiss, and then he decides he can't be with her or whatever, and it's like, oh, okay. Well, then you get into the next movie, and so it's like, oh, okay, like, he's like, sees her on the billboards every day or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, she's like at his birthday, and she's like clearly still into him or whatever, and they have this like really heartfelt conversation, and then he's like, looks like they're about to kiss, and he's like, no, like, I can't, like, he basically internally is like, no, I can't do this, just like an unspoken thing.
Yeah.
And then she's like, I'm seeing someone, and you're like, what? And you're like, you're just gonna pull that on him? Okay. And then he's like, okay, well, that's good. And then freaking as she's engaged to this ass, she gets engaged within like a couple of months, by the way. Like, they moved fast. And then she's engaged to him. Well, they meet up at this cafe after he loses his powers or whatever. And she's like, oh, like, I was taking to heart what you said about, and she's like, I think I, like, basically trying to figure out if Peter still likes her or not. Or that she's like, just kiss me. She's like, I just need to know something.
She's still engaged.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and I'm like, you are still engaged. Well, she goes in for a kiss, and then obviously it doesn't happen because Doc Ock attacks or whatever. Well, then, like, they're clearly like, listen, she is so Two-Faced. I'm sorry. Like, she is playing some games that I'm like, Pete, my boy, you can do better. There's a scene, all right, it's right before the mugging scene, where these 2 girls just kind of smile really nicely at Peter as he's like walking down the street or whatever, and I was like, oh, that's sweet. And I'm like, man, Peter, my boy, get you someone who will treat you better.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, if you, like, listen, if you think, well, actually, I'm sorry, she did end up kissing. She kissed it. You know what? All right, we'll get down to Spider-Man 3, but
Oh
I'm
man,
saying
you're getting into such a good rant right now.
she kissed Harry when she was dating Peter.
Oh, yeah.
MJ ain't nothing,
She
all
ain't
right?
loyal.
She is not loyal. Anyway, I digress. MJ is not great, and this is why Gwen Stacy is the best love interest for in the movies for Peter. But yes, as a kid,
To be fair, on the third movie, Spider-Man kisses Gwen Stacy, and then she kisses Harry. That's
Yes.
just like, in all fairness. However, Peter gets his revenge in the third movie. He treats her like crap.
he's like,
he treats her so
you've been doing
poorly.
this to me for years, all right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like it's just their relationship
That's why I
is
said,
not healthy.
as a kid, I did not like the back and forth that continues for movies.
Yeah.
Like, MJ is the weakest part of the trilogy, in my
I agree.
opinion. However, I still feel for Peter in those moments because this is a person who he loves, and it's a very relatable thing. But yeah, she's not the best love interest. In these,
I don't think
films.
she's well developed as a character either. Like I think
No.
she, again, when we get
They
to
have
the Tasman
nothing
movies,
on the Amazing Spider-Man. Like,
yeah,
God,
it's
nothing. That
yeah.
chemistry, everything. Like, I've never rooted for a relationship so much when it comes to those other movies, the Amazing
Right.
Spider-Man movies. I mean, God. With these, I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, just get on with it, you know? I remember
Yeah.
thinking that as a kid, too. I remember walking out of the theater and just being like, it was a great movie, but I don't like that part with MJ. Like,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And I'm like,
I have
9-year-old
a
me.
question for you though.
Yeah.
As like whenever you saw this movie, like. So, like, say you walked out of the theater,
Mm-hmm.
and the only two Spider-Man movies are this one and Spider-Man 2. Which one did you like better?
Oh, I like this one easily. And
Really?
Yeah, and I think it was because the third act just blew me away. But I was so invested, even to this day, but back then I was so invested in just seeing Peter get beaten up. And seeing
That sounds so
yeah.
sadistic as
Yeah,
you
I
say
know.
that. Man,
No.
I loved watching him get beat up.
Yeah, but it was really interesting to see the man behind the mask more than just
Right.
Spider-Man swinging around, and getting to see that side of the hero, and you could tell like he felt happiest when he was Spider-Man, because every time he has
Yeah.
it, he's like woo, swinging around, having
Yeah.
fun, good time. But when it's just him being Peter, it was obviously weighing on him. But that third act. And we haven't talked much about Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, because
Yeah.
he's like, God, if Peter and Spider-Man's 1A, then Doc Ock's 1B. Like, they are
Right.
so good in this movie, but that third act is still 17 years later one of the best and unique action sequences for a comic book movie. It's so different than anything we've gotten. I think, like, you and I talked about this with the X-Men Dark Phoenix. There's a lot of similarities with that third act because it's on like a train or whatever.
Right.
But I was like, I don't understand like why we continue to get the same generic third, act battles for comic book movies, and there's just nothing unique or special about these. But with this movie, it's insanely good.
Yeah.
The subway scene, the fighting was amazing. I think the CG holds up pretty well, but you can obviously tell the difference between what's shot in camera and when it switches
Yeah.
over to CG.
Yeah.
And then it hits that point where Peter saves everyone on the train, and they
So that may be my favorite moment in comic book movie
yeah,
history.
because it's not even just the saving part, but when everybody in the train picks him up, takes him over, his identity is revealed. They're like, your secret's safe with us. Doc Ock comes back, and all of the New Yorkers are like, you want to get to him, you got to get through me.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's New York right there. Like,
Yeah, it's a theme that you mentioned again in the first movie,
Yep.
which hit me really hard when I watched the first movie, and then again in the second part, I was like, man, Keenan's got a point. Like, again, the New York City as a character, and you feel that not even just in this scene, but in all these other scenes when like the kids are like, "Whoa, how'd you do that?" and all this stuff, and like the woman that's like, "Whoa, Spidey, go!" and you know, like you love the New Yorkers because it's like, man, like they rally behind Spider-Man. Yeah, it's great, and yeah, that scene when like they all literally lift up Spider-Man. Yeah, like it's so poetic. And symbolic that it always sticks with me. Yep. The reason I asked you how you felt about it when you were a kid is actually I remember Spider-Man 2 not being my favorite Spider-Man movie. I did not really like it that much. It's crazy. Because I watched Spider-Man 1 like religiously. Yeah. It was like a 2 or 3 times a day thing for me as a kid. Yeah. And obviously this is me being like, you know, we've got a 5-6 year age gap between us. Yeah. So I'm like, you know, however old I am, like 3 or 4. And I remember like, I think I was probably like 5 maybe when Spider-Man 2 came out. And I still saw it in theaters. And I remember being like, oh, that was good. But like, it did not stick with me. And my dad loved Spider-Man 2, obviously because he was an adult and he understood more of all that stuff. And I was like I remember my dad having, and I still wish to this day I had this shirt, this light blue Spider-Man 2 shirt that has like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and it was again sponsored by Dr. Pepper. It was like a Diet Dr. Pepper, like Spider-Man 2. And I'm like, I wish I had that shirt to this day still. Maybe it's still laying around somewhere. I don't know. I think my dad gave it to me at one point, and I was like, heck yeah. But yeah, Spider-Man 1 actually was my favorite, and then within the past, you know, 10 years or so, Spider-Man 2 obviously became just so poignant to me because of all the themes and just how much it embodies the heart of Spider-Man. Yeah. And I think that's what I love about this trilogy in general, is how much heart it has because of the relationships and his personal struggles. I even, again, we haven't talked much about Doc Ock, but obviously we're big Spider-Man PS4 fans, and so I was sitting here watching and I'm like, man, you can really see where they got a lot of inspiration in Insomniac's version of Peter and Doc Ock's relationship from this movie specifically. Because in the comics, Doc Ock and Peter, they don't have like a good relationship. Like it's straight up just like, I'm gonna outsmart you, Spider-Man kind of thing. And whereas like personally, I love it when both the Insomniac version and this version, like, oh, he meets Otto as the man. He knows the good man that is Otto Octavius, and who is corrupted.
It's no fault of his own. Like, it's
right.
He understands, like, this isn't you. You have been corrupted by, you know, this tech, and a lot of it is just because Otto is a little bit can be a little bit arrogant, and especially in this film, because he's just like, Peter obviously raises his concerns with trying to create renewable energy in New York City, basically creating the power of the sun. And Otto's just like, don't worry about it. I've gone through the test, and like I'm good. Like, you know, he's very arrogant when it comes to this. He's just like, I know what I'm doing, and I think the Insomniac's version kind of plays on the same thing, where Peter has some concerns about it, and he's just like, I'm fueled by my own, you know, I'm gonna do it my way, I'm gonna do this, I can do it. But yeah, the whole thing about establishing a relationship first with the villain and giving you a chance to care about their relationship is really cool and important, because it's just not like, oh, here's the hero, here's the villain. It's like, oh, it's more than just that. And they do that actually with the first movie too, because obviously it's Harry's dad, but he doesn't find out until a little bit later, whereas you know, he knows this is Otto Octavius in this. He knows the man that he is. And they do a really good job in all the movies with their villains.
That's the one thing I love about Spider-Man's villains in particular, is the personal relationship he has with almost all of his villains. Obviously, there's a couple in the comics that he does not have personal relationships with, and that's why I'm a big Green Goblin fan and a big Venom fan, is because of the personal relationship he has with those characters in the comics specifically. Yes, exactly. Again, why I love Doc Ock in the PS4 version, and in this, and in the next movie when we get to it, you know, Sandman and stuff like that. like they creating those personal tethers allows for so much just like personal character growth in both parties, but for both Peter and for whoever the other villain is, and that's something that's always been, you know, like it's something with, again, when we get to the future movies, and it's something that I have to like talk about before I forget. I will forget if I don't mention them. Like, what I love about Homecoming is the personal connection that he has with Vulture, and why while I love Mysterio and Far From Home, there's not really a personal connection there other than through the mediation of Tony Stark, right? Like, so it's like, it's not as good. But I mean, I think we gotta agree though that like, I mean, maybe it's up to personal bias. Like I think personal bias, Norman Osborn is probably my favorite because I love Willem Dafoe's portrayal of Green Goblin. But I think objectively speaking, like I gotta say that Alfred Molina's Doc Ock is top tier and definitely the best out of this trilogy.
Yeah, objectively speaking, he is. You know, he's the best villain in the best movie in the trilogy. But I agree, like growing up, like Green Goblin was always my guy for the villain. Like whenever I thought about Spider-Man squaring off against anyone, it was always Green Goblin, Hobgoblin, you know. So yeah, I actually, like, I had the action figure with Green Goblin on his glider. Like, I had all that stuff. So I was always disappointed when he died in the first one. But God,
I love that he comes back, like,
he does,
continuously, and that's again that Osborn legacy where like he lives on through Harry.
Yeah.
And that's really cool that I'm like, oh, they didn't just like make it this meaningless death, right? Like it's like it carries weight that the fact that they killed Norman Osborn.
Its consequences. It's gonna carry over for 3 movies. So
it's and that was one thing that I was going to mention. It feels like everything that happens in these movies actually like has consequences. I think the moment that made me stick out to that was that I was like, oh wow, this movie, like the first movie and this movie are really well paced.
Yeah.
I think they all 3 are. But the second movie, I'm like sitting there like, oh wow, like you get an action scene in the beginning with him trying to get the pizza on time. It's like kind of more fun. Like he's not fighting anybody, but it's like, okay, yeah, cool. He's trying to get these pizza boxes. It's like, why wouldn't he be Spider-Man and trying to get pizza?
Yeah.
Well, then he's trying to get to MJ's play and gets caught up in this police chase. And
some great web swinging throughout that. The
so
one where he
good.
goes in between the 18-wheeler.
Yes.
Oh my
so
God.
Good. One of my favorites.
And the physics of it, like, you know, Sam Raimi understanding, like, he's got to be swinging with his left hand, and he's going to need to get in between this small little crease, and he's going to have to shoot it, you know, with his right hand and pull in order to get through that. And God, I mean,
it gets slick.
But it gets even better in the third movie. I think it's the best web swinging, but
yeah.
I also think that the suit in this movie just looks more vibrant than the first one.
Dude,
and
the suits and even the costume design in general is fantastic. They do change the Spider-Man suit a little bit. The colors and the patterns. The emblem is a little bit bigger. It's the more classic Raimi symbol, which we do end up like. It does look very reminiscent of the PS4 logo.
Yeah.
Which again is Insomniac showing their respect to the Raimi universe and knowing that like that is a fantastic interpretation of Spider-Man. But Doc Ock's, you know, his design of just like the trench coat and like the arms feel like very accurate, but at the same time very realistic looking, like with the bands around the arms making it like, oh, these can stretch out in and out, and like having the different attachments. Like I never realized as a kid
when it opens and then like something else will come out of it to grab something very small. It's like small details like that.
Right. And like even like the spike in the middle of it and stuff. I'm like, and I love when he's walking on arms and everything. I'm like, man, like they nailed it with Doc Ock. And like one scene that I love that's definitely attributed to Sam Raimi's horror roots is when Doc Ock wakes up in that surgical room and he is just slaying all of these surgeons. You're like,
so many.
Oh my God.
There's so many great shots in there where you're just like, Evil Dead, Evil Dead, Evil Dead. Because you're just like, this is taken from Evil Dead. The part where the Doc Ock has one of the surgeons or doctors pinned against the wall, and then there's just like zoom in on the chainsaw, and then a quick zoom in on the guy's face, because like Sam Raimi loves these like quick cutting zooms, especially into people's mouth as they're screaming. It happens a lot in this movie. Like it happens a ton. Yeah. He loves to capture people screaming. But there's like that shot, which is really cool. That's when you're like, that's Sam Raimi. I mean, just the horror of that whole scene is completely like, that's Sam Raimi doing his horror thing. There's actually even another really cool sequence when I think this might be after the car gets thrown through the little cafe, and then Peter and MJ stand up, and you just hear the thuds of something like heavy walk, like a dinosaur's walking, and there's these quick cuts into Peter and MJ to see their reaction. That is like one of my favorites. I'm just like the horror that you feel. You know, the score, and hearing Doc Ock just walking through, and like people panicking and screaming. It's like master direction, camera work, all that stuff. I mean, Sam Raimi is just, he's a magician with what he does.
He makes villains feel menacing. That is for sure. There's another scene that I remember actually always, like, I forgot that it had scared the crap out of me as a kid so much, but it's the part when Harry is out on the balcony right before he goes to get, like, it's the night before he's going to get MJ, like, this, or try to find Spider-Man. He like Harry is like on the balcony, and he like looks over, and an arm just shoots up past the balcony and just hits him in the face. I remember as a kid that scared the crap out of me. And there's one shot in particular that's not even like a scary shot, but it's one of my favorite shots. It's right after Peter gets his powers back, and it's him swinging again. Like, he's in the suit, he gets the suit back, and he's like, I want Spider-Man, and he starts swinging, and then it's as he's swinging, and then it zooms out of Otto's lens, and it's actually Otto looking, like seeing Spider-Man swinging towards him in the distance. I was like, that is awesome. That is such a cool shot.
There's actually a shot very similar, or technique very similar, that he does in the first movie, when Green Goblin has the kids on that little trolley that he can drop, or MJ, and he's like, decide, and you see both of the lenses for Spider-Man, and each lens has each group falling. Like, you have MJ falling in the other one. And I'm like, brilliant. Who thinks of this? You know, it's like so cool. But the thing with Doc Ock. Question for you: did you watch Spider-Man 2 or 2.1?
I've seen both. Personally, I end up watching Spider-Man. I watched Spider-Man 2, the theatrical cut.
Yes.
Because that's what I'm more used to. But I have seen 2.1, and I enjoy it just the same.
2.1 is interesting. I think one of the main changes is the scene in the elevator with that one guy. And he's like, in 2.1, he's trying to like pitch him on like all these marketing things. And it's a little too extended. And you're like, this actually is not funny, which I'm glad they kind of cut from it. But
there's that MJ stuff.
Yeah, and then there's the thing with I mean, this is amazing, but J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson,
Spider-Man suit.
in the Spider suit. Like, I love that, and he's so good in this movie.
Dude, J.K. Simmons is again the unsung hero in all of these movies. Like, I'm sitting there laughing so hard. Like, my girlfriend is like, why are you laughing? Because I'm laughing before the joke, the punchline is even here.
What's happening.
Like one of my favorites is like, he's like, boss, your wife lost her checkbook, and he's like, thanks for the good news.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? And also Mr. Ditkovich is also so funny.
Yeah.
Like, he's just like, if promises, or like, what does he say?
He's what is high? Like, can I spend it?
Yeah, he's like, hi, what is high? Can I spend it? And then he says, like, if promises were cookies, my daughter would be fat. And then it just shows her, and she's just so skinny, and you're like, wow, like, you're like, Mr. Like, he literally has a no chill. Like, my girlfriend is like, that's horrible. I'm like, I know, but it's so funny. like also, like, one of my favorite scenes with him is he, like, the next morning he's going to use the bathroom.
Yep.
And like he knocks, and he goes like, just cuts Peter into it, reopens the door, goes, rinse, and Peter just closes the door. It's so funny.
One of I think my favorite J.K. Simmons moment, or J. Jonah Jameson, is very early on in the film when they're trying to find a story for the front page, And Peter's like, Spider-Man won't let me shoot him or whatever. And then he was like, he gives Robbie like a headline. He's like, food poisoning scare across New York and chicken or something like that. He's like, is there? And he's like, I'm feeling a little nauseous. Yes.
Yeah.
He's just making up stories for the front page. So it's good.
Speaking of Robbie, there's a scene. It's literally half a second long. Yeah, and I know, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Is this like I heard Spider-Man was there when he's talking about the accident that happened with Otto, and he like looks at Peter, and Peter looks at him, and they just kind of give a side eye. Like Robbie's like, I know you're Spider-Man.
Yep.
Again, I also think Aunt May knows that Peter is Spider-Man, like 100%, because. The whole monologue she gives when they're moving out and selling all the stuff to get some money, she's
trying to inspire him,
right? Like that is like she's like, oh, she knows that like he's beating himself up, and it's like, no, like you may have like you need to be Spider-Man, like people look up to you, like like your actions are not going without they're not going unnoticed. So I love those little teases like that, and again, like I love the characters in the city of New York. It's just to reiterate what you said about the first movie. It really has stuck with me, and it's just stuck with me this whole trilogy. Like it just has so much heart to it, and I think at the end of the day, that's what Spider-Man is all about, and why I love both the characters of Spider-Man and Superman is they feel very heartfelt. And it just. Man, like these movies, they really stick with that.
They give me hope for the character because I'm just like, and the same thing with the Insomniacs version. It's like when I watch these things, I get excited about Spider-Man again, and I'm like, I want to read the comics and I want to play the games and I want to like watch all these things because they just make me feel so good. Even the third one, which we're gonna get to, is not without its flaws. But even after watching that, I'm just like. This movie's freaking good. Like I'm still enjoying. I'm like it's cheesy as heck, but I'm still enjoying my time.
Right. I was sitting there and I'm watching it. I'm just like, man, we were so blessed to be able to get not one but two like
perfect,
nearly 10 out of 10 Spider-Man movies. I'd consider Spider-Man 2 a 10 out of 10, if not like a 9.5 or something.
It's my number one comic book movie, and it probably always will be. Yeah.
If something, it'd have to be like, even if Andrew and Tobey come back in No Way Home, it's still not going to beat Spider-Man 2 for me. Like
I don't even think it'll beat the Amazing Spider-Man movies for me. Like, I'm going to be pumped to see them, but I mean, it's not gonna have the heart and like, emotional investment that I had with all these other films, Right.
So
that's just, I'm excited. Like, I hope that they're going to be in it. I'm excited to see them if they're in it. I think they're going to be in it. But, I mean, these films forever, like 50 years from now, if I'm alive, they're going to mean so much to me. And they shaped who I am. I know it's just like a very cliche thing to say, but honestly,
I totally get it.
When it came to being a kid, like I had Spider-Man in the back of my mind when it came to making like the right decisions. So, yeah, I wanted to be a hero because he was my hero and because of these movies. Yeah. So, that's all I got to say about that. It's the greatest comic book movie of all time. No questions asked. There's a lot of really good ones, but this is just... If
you disagree, don't even tweet me about it. Just shut up.
No, you have your own opinion, but I mean, it's so hard. Like, even if you don't think it's the best, it's probably in your top 4.
Yeah. Yeah, it's my personal favorite. I mean, on my Letterboxd, it's in my top 4 movies of all time. Empire Strikes Back, Spider-Man 2, Blade Runner 2049, and The Guest. That's like my top 4 movies of all time. Yeah, I'm like, that's how much Spider-Man like has stuck with me, specifically this movie.
Yep.
And one last thing, just a minor thing to some. Actually, it's not that minor to me, but man, I think we mentioned it in the last episode. Danny Elfman's soundtrack, his score for these movies, just so good. It's
Spider-Man.
They reshape and reformat the Spider-Man theme into like like I don't think we would have gotten Insomniac's version, not just even the soundtrack, but that game in general, without these movies.
Yeah.
Specifically without Spider-Man 2. Like, there is so much inspiration there. And again, the soundtrack of Insomniacs, done by John Pisano, which I know is one of your favorite soundtracks.
Yep.
You can see the inspiration with like the choir and the brass. And like one of my favorite parts about the Raimi version is that it has really good use of percussion. Like I think it literally yes, like the drums, and like sometimes uses like it uses bongos, I think sometimes. Like
it makes you feel like every time I hear the very beginning of the intro, I'm like, it makes you feel like a spider is crawling up the wall like really quickly or up a web. It's so cool, but
it's crazy that the soundtrack literally makes you like envision a character.
Yes.
Like, and it's just so well done.
I love John Pisano's Spider-Man PS4 score. It was like my number one album of 2019 played on Spotify. I love that score, but this is like the ultimate Spider-Man theme. And I will turn down all the music on my Spider-Man PS4 gameplay, and I will play that and swing around in Spider-Man, just to give me those feels. I remember when they first released the Raimi suit on Spider-Man PS4, I was like, all right, Danny Elfman, press play, and we're going to swing around. We're going to fight crime.
I'm still so thankful that they added that suit, because it's just, we talked about it in the last episode, but
it's a good suit, man.
Spider-Man 2, 10 out of 10 for me.
10 out of 10, for sure. No questions asked. It will never move off that 10 out of 10. It's
like I'd have to be crippling like depression. Like it would have to overcome me to be able to for it to not be.
Isn't it crazy how like before rewatching it, I'm always like I question myself. I'm like, is this as good as I remember? I'm like, because I haven't seen it in a while, and it might just be nostalgia. Mm-hmm. And then like 5 minutes into it, I'm like, this is amazing, man. This is great. I'm smiling like
it is like such a therapeutic movie.
I can't wait to watch the third one.
Me too.
This whole journey is just so fun to me.
Spider-Man 3 was my most hyped film of all time. Like I followed that movie religiously.
We're so close to starting our Spider-Man 3 review, because I'm like thinking of the black suit theme, and I'm just like, oh my god, I'm so excited. Like that theme when the black suit gets revealed.
Mm-hmm. Dude, I think for Spider-Man 3, I refreshed the website every day since it came, like was active for like an entire year. I was like, I need more Venom. Like, show me Venom, you know? And all of this stuff. Like, as a kid, I was through the roof excited for Spider-Man 3. But that will wait for another day. That is our Spider-Man 2 review. Do you have any other thoughts before we wrap up the episode?
No, I just thank you guys for listening. It's because I love doing this. It gets me so excited. Like, there's nothing more that I enjoy creating content about than Spider-Man, because I can talk about it endlessly. Grayson's the same way. I feel like there's multiple times we almost turned into a Spider-Man only podcast over the past 3 years. So I enjoy it so much, and the fact that you guys are like, posting on your Insta stories that you're watching along with us and trying to follow along with all the movies, and DMing us about when the next one's going to come out and when to watch the next movie. It gets me so excited. So thank you guys so much. And I can't wait to do more.
You said it as best as better than I could. So with that being said, follow us on our socials at comicblast_. You can follow me at Straightster8, him at Keenan Creates on basically whatever. Should I shout out our patrons? Should I do that?
We'll just leave that for the normal episodes, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Speaking of which, they being Keenan, Cole, and Jess, put out a Loki series review. I listened to it. It was very good. And I'm very happy because they basically said everything that all the thoughts that I was thinking as well. So very good review. Go listen to it. They get into some really good deep dive stuff, just like Keenan and I did with this review.
Yeah.
So yeah, go check out the main episode. I am sure the Spider-Man 3 review will be out within the next 2 weeks, at the latest, 2 weeks away. So in the meantime, get ready, grab your popcorn, go watch Spider-Man 3, and get ready for our review on that. And yeah, with that being said,
Pizza time.